Hello, everyone. This is Andrew Tao, and welcome to Cultivating Kingdom Culture. I am not qualified to teach. I'm not qualified to really do anything at all. I have pretty much no ministry experience, but essentially, I'm just a young guy who has a lot of questions. I graduated to Quail Falls College back in 2022. My major was biblical languages, my minor was pastoral ministry. And the reason why the podcast here came to my mind was because I started to question a lot about local church. Not that the local church is bad, not that my local church is bad, but I just started to question, is there more to church? Is this really all there is to church 40, 50 years from now? Is this really what I want to be doing in a local church? And that's when I started to really question, what is the purpose of a local church? How should it look like? What does it look like to do church? So this podcast, the goal is one, for me to establish and understand and learn what does a good and healthy local church look like, and two, what is the purpose and mission of a local church. And as I am embarking on this journey, I want to take you as listeners alongside me. And my hope is that as you as listeners hear in on this, that some of you would even join me. Because once again, I'm not an expert. I'm just a young guy who has a lot of questions. And for you who are pastors or teachers, professors, please reach out to me. Please help me. I want to learn a lot more about cultivating kingdom culture. So essentially, that is the purpose of this podcast, is to gain and understand what is the purpose and mission of the local church. And two, what does it look like to carry this out within the local church context? And not only that, but I don't want it to just limit it to the local church aspect, but from there stemming into what does it look like to cultivate kingdom culture in the home as a mom, as a dad? What does it look like to cultivate kingdom culture in the workplace? Maybe some of you are in a manager position or you are a boss. So what does it look like to cultivate kingdom culture in that aspect? So essentially from local church stemming out beyond. That is the purpose and goal. And my target audience is specifically Hmong Christians, but not just Hmong Christians, but those who are also immigrant Christians. So for, let's say, the Chinese, the Koreans, the Africans, those who've immigrated from a different country and have now come to the United States. And this is my target audience because it's my background. I found myself questioning a lot, is the answer to become the American church? Is the answer to become the Western church? I think that the Western church, the American church, has great things about it. But deep down inside for me to become and join the American church, for me to imitate them, it doesn't quite feel right for me just because I myself, that's not my DNA. So my question is, what does it look like to apply those principles that the Western church teaches, and what does it look like to live that out as a Hmong person who is a Christian? So with that, growing up in the Hmong church, I questioned a lot. What does it look like to be in a biblical church? I think a lot of times growing up, it's just go every Sunday, just go Wednesday, just make sure you attend. It felt a lot like a club for me. You just make sure you get your weekly clock in and clock out. But as I've been back now, it's something that I've been questioning a lot. What is the local church? What is it supposed to actually look like? And I think that's why it's important that here, at least in this first episode, to kind of give a rough definition or understanding of what a local church is and what the purpose is. So last week I was listening to a podcast called Practitioners Podcast. And in this episode, the two hosts were interviewing Dan Spader. If you don't know who Dan Spader is, he is the author of Four Chair Discipling, and he's the founder of Sun Life Ministries. And Dan Spader has been fundamental in helping me understand and develop what a local church is supposed to look like. So please read his book if you're interested. He is a great resource, very wise guy. I wish I could meet him. But anyways, on the podcast, there was a statement that Dan Spader said that really struck a chord in me. The statement is this. He says, "Your Christology informs your missiology, and this informs your ecclesiology." So what this means is your understanding of who Jesus is, your theology of who Jesus is, that will influence and inform your belief on what your mission is, and that will inform and impact what you believe the purpose of the local church is, your ecclesiology. And to me, I just found this to be so profound because I think a lot of times we start from the other end. Oh, a church should do this, a church should do this, a church should do this. I think we come in with a lot of outside influence. We're starting from the back rather than starting from the beginning. So I think that this is a very profound statement by Dan Spader, and it helped me to really start to develop my own ecclesiology. First, understanding who is Jesus and what is the mission that Jesus had, and then now what is the purpose of the local church. And for Dan Spader, his argument is that not unless we can begin to understand who Jesus is, the incarnate Jesus, the Jesus who became flesh and walked on this earth, not unless we understand the incarnate Jesus, can we actually begin to start to understand the mission and purpose of the local church. And this actually started to really get the gears turning in my head because a lot of times I'm thinking about Jesus as only God, pre-incarnate Jesus, or resurrected Jesus. But a lot of times the incarnate Jesus is one that I tend to not think about as much, which is kind of weird because the Gospels talk about the incarnate Jesus a lot. So this was profound for me, Dan Spader's thoughts here, and has been really challenging me a lot. And, I agree with Dan Spader because Dan Spader makes the argument that Jesus is who we need to understand. And I agree because Jesus is the king. This is his kingdom. And the only way to understand the kingdom and the ways of the kingdom is to understand the king. So I think, once again, in my own life, I've made a lot of mistakes of trying to understand the kingdom, the ways of the kingdom, without understanding who is the king of the kingdom. So it's important to understand who is this king? Well, it's Jesus, the Messiah. But the question is, how exactly did Jesus establish his kingdom? And from what Dan Spader has shared, from what I have learned and read, I see that Jesus does it through disciple making. The kingdom of God is furthered, is established, is furthered through disciple making. And in the Gospels, it's very clear that this is what Jesus does. He grew his kingdom through disciple making. He starts with his core disciples, and with his core disciples, he develops a really good relationship with them, shows them, models them what it looks like to be one of the kingdom. And eventually, he sends them, and they go out, and they do the same. And then those who they have discipled, they've made disciples of, would go out and do the same as well. And the kingdom multiplies. In the book of Acts, you see thousands come to faith. And it's not because of super crazy method, but it's following the method that Jesus modeled, which is disciple making. So what is disciple making? And I think reading Matthew 28, 18 through 20 here will help us to understand what exactly disciple making is. So a lot of you are familiar with this verse, the Great Commission. For you in the CMA, you especially are very familiar with this. So let me read it for us here. Matthew 28, 18 through 20. This is what it says. And Jesus came up and spoke to them, saying, "All authority has been given to me, in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." So this is the Great Commission here. I mean, I'm sure many of you know the context. It's Jesus after he has been crucified, he has resurrected from the grave, and he is now in a place where his authority is that of the resurrected king. Prior to that, yes, the authority is his, yes, but as Jesus who took on flesh, prior to the crucifixion, there is a level of authority that he did not take because he humbled himself, as Philippians has taught, in order to fulfill his purpose as the Messiah. And then once he has fulfilled that purpose, he rises as the resurrected king. And as he rises as the resurrected king, he establishes and gives a final command to the disciples in Matthew here. And it's important to understand here that in this text here, I think a lot of times, like especially for me, when I read it, a lot of times I focus a lot on go, therefore, in verse 19. But the actual main verb, the command, the imperative of this verse is not go, but it's actually make disciples. So what that means is make disciples is the command that Jesus is giving. And the question is, how do I go about making disciples? Well, as I am going. And as I'm going, we are to, let's see what it says. As we are going, we are to make disciples. That is the main thing. As we are going, we are to baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. So it's important to understand that in this text here, disciple making includes one, being sent by the original discipler, who is Jesus, and then two, continual dependence upon Jesus as the original discipler, the king of his kingdom. And then three, evangelism that eventually leads to conversion, that leads to baptism. This is also essential. And then four, biblical teaching and preaching the commands of Jesus, which is what the text says. And then five, walking alongside those who we disciple to obey and then apply the biblical teaching, which this verse says, teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. I, Jesus, have commanded you. And it's very important that in the midst of disciple making, we don't forget that we are under Jesus, the original discipler. I'm thinking of John 15. I mean, at the end of the day, we're just branches. Jesus is the vine. Our source of life comes from him. Apart from him, we can do nothing. And I think that's essential because especially in the Western world here, I think we have that consumer mindset. It's all about the most efficient, the most productive, and we want to take whatever method works the best, whatever will get us the quickest results. We want to take that and use that. But the thing is, when we do that, it's very easy to forget that Jesus is the source, and we are dependent on him, and we are to do it in the way he has modeled. And this is all important because this command, I love the way that Dan Spader says it in his book. The great commandment, the two greatest commandment is loving God and then loving others. It's important because in the midst of disciple making, we need to not lose sight of our love for God. That is ultimate, loving God. But because we love God and because his love flows in us, it must flow through us to flow and love others. So loving God and loving others is essential, to not forget either one. And the reason why I see that disciple making is so crucial is because I think a lot of times in the local church context, disciple making is seen more as a mark of a church. But to me, I actually don't see it as a mark. I actually see it as the purpose or the DNA of the church. And the reason why I say that is because when I look at the life of Jesus, what he did was disciple making from the beginning of his ministry to the end of it. And you see how the kingdom spreads from a few to thousands, to thousands, to thousands. And I think Jesus is teaching something very profound that we must follow as well. And the local church, we are called to extend his kingdom in the same way that he modeled for us. So that is the purpose and DNA that I have come to understand. So, with that, having established just a brief explanation of it, of the local church, the purpose of the local church, it's important to understand that as a local church, we're not here to exist as a club. And I think that's why understanding that disciple making is the purpose is so crucial, because if we see church as a club, then disciple making doesn't matter. If we see church as a club, then it's not about furthering God's kingdom. It's about getting benefit, mutual benefit from people who want the same thing. So I'm thinking maybe like a sports club. Hey, we're in a club together because why? Well, we like sports. Well, the thing is, the local church isn't somewhere we just gather because, well, hey, I like this. No, we're gathered together not as a club, but as an actual living entity, the church, which has been established in and through Christ. So with that, I think all my life, in my experience in being in a Hmong local church, my mindset a lot of times was, oh, club, it's like a club. You go to church, you hang out with your friends, have fun, and, I mean, it's a place to just go and relax and let go of some stress. But the thing is, the more and more I lived into that, the more and more I felt unsatisfied. I think temporarily there's a great satisfaction in being around people who are fun to be around, to hang out, to be friends with. But then there's also a dissatisfaction, unsatisfaction, being unsatisfied that is there actually more to this? And to me, I wonder if in a lot of our local Hmong churches or in our immigrant churches, I wonder if we've falsely advertised a club rather than the gathering of God's people. And I'm not here to point fingers at anyone. I truly appreciate those who've gone before us, because, I mean, we as the Hmong people came to the U.S., had nowhere to go, and we had those who stepped up and led us, and I appreciate that so much. But I also think that in that, I think we brought a lot of what it means to be Hmong culturally. I think we've brought that in, and we've made that what it means to be a church. So with that, I think there's a lot of things that we are doing that helps with gospel living, but there's also a lot of things that we do that may be against gospel living. So I'm just thinking about those things as I'm thinking about the local church. And with that, those things that may be against the gospel living, I'm reminded of a quote from Charles Spurgeon. He once said this: "If you have to give a carnival to get people to come to church, then you have to keep giving a carnival to keep them coming back." And to me, as I'm thinking about the Hmong local churches, I'm wondering, is this something that we fell into? Did we advertise something that's not the gospel? Did we give a carnival some perks that would get people to come, but then that's all they come for is the carnival, the benefits? I'm thinking maybe like funeral perks, or wedding perks, or anything that we would desire culturally as Hmong people, and we get it at church. My question is, have we maybe falsely advertised those things over the gospel? So that's why I love this quote from Charles Spurgeon. It's very convicting, because once again, who doesn't want to grow? Who doesn't want to succeed? So we offer what attracts people, a carnival. But the thing is, what we offer is what people come to, and it's what they expect every time. So my question is, how do we transition then, if we've been advertising a carnival-like gathering rather than a gospel gathering, a local church? And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. I'm just observing, just throwing questions out there. So if I'm saying anything that you disagree with, please let me know. Help me out. Maybe you could join me on the podcast too, because I'm just a young guy. I don't really know anything at all. So that's just my question. I mean, I don't know how many people join a local Hmong church for an actual gospel-centered reason. So those are just some of my observations, some of my thoughts and questions. And with that, I've seen that a lot of our pastors, their evangelism, their energy that is used towards evangelism is actually used towards their own church members. evangelizing to their own church members because, well, they came to church for funeral perks, they came to church for wedding perks, but then there's still a lack of the gospel. So a lot of pastors are using energy to preach the gospel once again to those who should have joined because the gospel was the heart of church. Just my observation. I mean, I may be wrong about it though. But with that, I mean, I think I just see a lot of pastors struggling with that. And that's why I kind of want to do this podcast too, so that I can reach out to pastors who have gone further and can give some wisdom, insight on, hey, how do we do church so that we model what the New Testament church looked like, so we can live in the way that Jesus taught or ordained. So with that, next episode, I do want to interview the two local church pastors that that are at the church that I'm attending right now. So I have Pastor Tim and then Pastor Andrew. So I would like to have them on the next episode talking a little bit more about this carnival method and the struggles of it, and what advice they can give on, hey, how do we transition beyond that? How do we start to move beyond that? And what wisdom they can give for that. But for today, I just want to give a brief recap of what was all said. Once again, I'm just a young guy, not qualified for teaching, not qualified for anything, but I just have a whole bunch of questions, and I just want to talk to a bunch of pastors, teachers, elders, anyone that can give me wisdom and that can give wisdom to my listeners as well. So please, if you have any wisdom to share, any thoughts, any insight, please contact me through Facebook if you are friends with me at Andrew Tao. Please feel free to call me, text me at 920-374-6189, or you can also email me at andtao05@gmail.com. So please feel free to reach out to me. But until then, this is Andrew Tao, just a young guy with a lot of questions, and you're listening to Cultivating Kingdom Culture. See ya.